Okay, let's open a word of prayer. Lord, pray that you'll bless our time together today as we discuss some of the things that are going on in the world today. We pray that you'll help us all to get some benefit from the topics that are discussed. Bless us, bless our time together. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, today I'm going to title this A Battlefield. The biggest battlefield, one of the biggest battlefields I have these days is trying to take a large amount of information and disseminate it down to a reasonable amount of time, because we have people here that help, and so I just can't stand up here and go for 3 or 4 hours. Although there are a few people that would like to see me do that. You can pray for them. But so this morning, I always I joke a little bit about how many tabs I have open on my computer. Sometimes I have 42. Well, I worked till late last night, and then I get up about 2 or 3 on Sunday mornings to finish up. And I went down, opened up my computer, and clicked on my browser, and it said, "Do you want to see all of these 102 tabs?" When I started my computer this morning, I couldn't get any sound from a video that I wanted to, and I think I just had sort of exceeded the max. So look for us on some other platforms. I apologize, but we're just a very small church, and so if it gets uploaded to other platforms, that's generally my responsibility, and I've not been very good at it. I did do a midweek update this week. Well, I titled it a sort of kind of midweek update because I didn't get it up till Friday morning. But so that's midweek someplace, depending on when you start the week. But so you might want to watch that. I will talk about some of the same topics today, some in a little bit more detail, some in less detail. So that one was only about 43 minutes, so if you want a shorter version than that. And by the way, if you don't like the long updates, you can always go if you're on YouTube, there is a little settings button that you can click, and it will allow you to adjust the speed. So you can ramp it up to like 1.5 or 2x speeds, or slow it down if you want. If you want a 4-hour update, you can slow it down, and you'll get close to that. So my goal, part of my goal some Sundays is to talk so fast that those people that put it up to 2x speed have a little bit of trouble listening to it, and it doesn't really make sense because I'm talking too fast. Do you understand what I'm saying? So if you like the Joe Isuzu speed remember that ad years ago where the guy talked fast. So we talk about the convergence of events, disrupted world. It is a battlefield. I know I have a couple interviews I'm doing with Minute to Midnight and Serpents and Doves this week, so you might look for those. I'll try to put those. I usually post on my Facebook or Twitter account. I'm trying to figure out Signal. I'm not bright enough yet to completely figure it out. So a couple things. We will talk in a little bit more about some of the claims that are being made about a number of what I would consider to be extreme weather events that seem to be taking place at a rather rapid pace around the world. I won't even touch on a lot of them, but it is a problem. But when I did that talk in Canada on the great revealing of the great setup, when I talked about the great reset that the World Economic Forum has set up, and I've mentioned this a number of times, that everything is changing. Corporate governance is changing, and they're using this thing called ESG. This is a report by PricewaterhouseCoopers, LeBrant, a PwC accounting firm and business consultants. And you see here the title of this, and this was done in conjunction with some of the World Economic Forum push to change the way things are done. They're changing the way corporations are governed. I mean, corporations used to be about making money, and they were making money for their shareholders. While that is still one of their goals, they have adopted these things called ESG, and it says here, beyond compliance, consumers and employees want business to do more on ESG. And it says 86% of employees prefer to support or work for companies that care about the same issues they do. So you see what the narrative that's built around this is, that everybody cares about these things: environment, social, and governance. So that, and they're adding people to boards. They're kicking people off of boards, and the purpose of these people, they're getting left-wing social environmental activists on boards. One of the big oil companies said that they're going to get out of oil, I think, essentially. That was, I think it was Exxon. I mean, when you think of oil, one of the things you think of is Exxon. But they're pushing this. I saw a big article this morning about the people who have spent their lives making gas internal combustion engines for automobiles. They're planning on getting rid of them in 5 or 6 years when all the cars are going to be electric. They think, I'm skeptical that will take place, but there will be a push for it. And then there'll be a push for driverless cars. I mean, the whole thing is connected together. 83% of companies, this survey said, of consumers think, or 83% of consumers think companies should be actively shaping ESG best practice. Now, I've not been a corporate governance lawyer in my career, but I know that there are corporate governance lawyers in big law firms, practice groups in big firms all over the country to help corporations comply with their governance obligations. They now have ESG practice groups because there's a big push for this in business. It says here 91% of business leaders believe their company has a responsibility to act on ESG issues. So whether they want to or not, and so all the corporations are going, for lack of a better term, woke. So here they polled 5 consumers, 2,500 employees, 1,257 business leaders in the US, Brazil, UK, Germany, and India in March and April of this year. And so you see here the environmental is an issue: climate change, water stress, decreasing biodiversity, raw materials extraction, toxic emissions and pollution, and wasteful packaging. Social, improving racial and gender, D&I, diversity and inclusion. And I'm sure if you're in a business, you've heard a lot in that business or law practice or whatever about diversity and inclusion. This is a big deal. And there are whole charity boards now that are pushing what they're about is not so much the purpose of the charity as the diversity and inclusion aspect. Confirming worker health and safety, access to health care, providing worker education and upskilling, and then governance. Looking at issues about widening pay gap between executives and workers, engaging in political lobbying and donations, increasing board diversity, avoiding corporate taxes, which seems to be what a lot of corporations try to do. And I believe that they should not have to pay any more taxes than they have. So you can see that these surveys, ESG commitments are driving consumer purchases and employee engagement. And again, all of this is coming out of this Great Reset thing. This has been part of the Davos World Economic Forum agenda for quite a period of time. And they ask consumers, I'm more likely to buy from a company that stands up for environmental, 80%. So you see that this has become a big narrative. How can companies make progress? Business leaders say we have social responsibility roles report directly to the CEO. And here, this is why I mentioned the narrative at the beginning. Do you see here what it says? What businesses can do to act on ESG? Tell a cohesive and balanced narrative. This is a very, in many respects, postmodern approach to things. People are concerned about the narrative, and the narrative becomes true. Whether it's true or not, it's a story that makes me feel like it's true. This is a postmodern approach to, this was going to kill theology. Leverage ESG reporting to tell your story. Prophetic prioritize the right ESG actions, lead on climate change. Okay, so you see how they went from acting on ESG, now it leads on climate change. And we'll talk a little bit more about, everywhere you look now, there is this thing about climate change. Tackle diversity and inclusion as a business issue. And so this push that you see here in this PwC report comes from the World Economic Forum in conjunction with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, which started out as, Agenda 21, Agenda 2021, and Agenda 2030, and the 14 or 15 SDGs, or 18, however many there are, the development goals. This is being pushed. So while it appears that the UN, in some respects, isn't that powerful or doesn't accomplish that much, they've really done through the organization of the UN and other organizations like the World Economic Forum, they have really started putting together the beginnings of a global world governance system. And we think that that has prophetic significance. We think that that's ultimately where this goes. So there's in the fourth seal in Revelation, the fourth seal, the rider on the horse goes forth, and it says that, now this is where I differ with a lot of people. They say this rider goes forth and kills 1/4 of the earth. And I don't think that that's what that's saying. I think what it's saying, correctly interpreted, is that he's given power up to the power of death over 1/4 of the earth. Now, then the question is it 1/4 of the world governments? So, for example, you could argue, well, Islam controls about 1/4 of the world's people. So is that the 1/4 of the earth? My friend Doug Hamp, whether you agree with him or not, says that 1/4 of the earth, if you look at the land mass of the earth relative to the size of the earth, it's about 25.6%, roughly 1/4. His conclusion is that this means whoever this person is will control 1/4 of the land, of the surface of the planet, which means he controls the world. So that's another way of looking at it. So this is something that is going to have to be dealt with, and it's going to be dealt with. So let's see here. Okay, well, let's just look at a few things. So we'll do a little bit of politics and that type of thing, but I think I have some information this morning. Now, look, maybe this information is out there. There are a lot of good researchers. I'm not the only researcher in the world, so if I say that I discovered this, I actually did discover this, but other people may have talked about it, but I think I'm going to make a connection that I've not seen elsewhere. So, but here's this. Sean Spicer used to be White House press secretary for a short time under the Trump administration, said this in response to a tweet or an article at Reuters about how AOC had gotten into political merchandise. She's selling T-shirts and banners and that sort of thing to make money, to raise money for her socialist agenda. And Sean says, well, wow, branding the USF, AOC makes a push into political merchandise, using capitalism to push socialism, ha, 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 and he's actually right. To which she responded, Sean, not sure if you know this, Sean, but transactions aren't capitalism. Capitalism is a system that prioritizes profit at any and all human and enviro cost. This is a bold-faced lie. But for what it's worth, our shop is unionized, doesn't operate for profit, and funds projects like free tutoring, food programs, and local organizing. But AOC, what you don't understand is what funds your organization is the profit that you make from the merchandise. You're not giving it away for free, are you? So frustrating. Okay, this is going to be kind of jumbled up a bit. But I'm going to start with this. First, we have this constant push on different information. This is the Department of Education handbook that was published, Roadmap to Reopening Safely and Meeting All Students' Needs. It's the ED Charlie Victor 019er handbook. And in that, the Department of Education of the United States linked to a group called the Abolitionist Teaching Network. They linked to it. They linked to it. Well, good thinking people looked at it and said, well, what does the Abolitionist Teaching Network believe? And now you would think there were abolitionists in America back in the 1800s, and what did they want to do? They wanted to abolish slavery. There are modern abolitionists that want to abolish abortion. In fact, there's a Mississippi case going to the Supreme Court. We're trying to get into the Supreme Court, I think, for the next term. It starts in the fall, in October, where the Mississippi law would effectively, I think it's Mississippi law, would ban all abortions in the state. Now, look, the Supreme Court way overstepped its bounds back in 1973 when it went with Roe versus Wade. It changed the nature and character of the court. It was a very seminal case. They went way outside the parameters of the Constitution. In fact, the justice who wrote the opinion, Roe versus Wade, said that he found this right in the shadows and the penumbra of the Constitution. In other words, not in the text of the Constitution, but in the shadows. Well, that was a pretty big shadow that he opened, a big can of worms that they opened up with that case. And the problem with that case was it took away, it was an issue that should have been decided, like a lot of moral issues in our culture, decided politically. You always hear this, you can't legislate morality. That's all that law does, is legislate somebody's version of morality. I used to joke I have a friend who's a lefty, good friend, long time. And I used to joke with him that the difference between conservatives and lefties is that conservatives will support a charity. The difference is you want to make me support your charity through taxes. Well, he didn't like that much, but I thought it was true. But it's a political issue, and so what's happening, and I've even seen some liberal blogs saying, we've really gotten into some trouble in our country because we've taken political issues and turned them into court issues when they shouldn't be court issues. So even if Roe versus Wade is overturned, it's going to become a big political fight. And you're going to see political fights in every state about whether that state's going to allow a right to abortion. Right now, it seems that the support is pretty strong, and I don't know that there will be that many states that will do like Mississippi and try to ban all abortions. So just know that even if Roe versus Wade is overturned, that doesn't mean that the issue is won. There's going to be a big fight. The only way to get the issue decided nationwide is a constitutional amendment in my period. But back to this education, Charlie Victor 019er handbook about reopening and abolitionist teacher network. Well, some people found out what they want to abolish is they want to tear down the whole education system. This is a very Marxist left-wing thing. I mean, I watched some of their videos. You can get on their website and watch them if you like to. Well, it's sort of like, you could go run 20 miles or you could watch these videos and get your heart rate up. So here's a little thing on Fox talking about, the Biden administration, the Biden administration, and believe me, I think there's no way that you don't call it the Biden administration or Obama's third term. But they got caught. So what do they do when they get caught? Well, like when you shine light in a kitchen where there's cockroaches, they run to the shadows. And they're like, oh, no, we didn't mean anything by that. We didn't really support what these people did. In other words, what are you going to believe? What you can read on paper? Believe your lying eyes, or what I tell you? So here's a little report on Fox about that.
The Biden administration walking back ties to a group pushing controversial teachings about race in 13,000 public schools. The Department of Education saying it does not support the Abolitionist Teaching Network, the ATN. That's a radical activist group that encourages to, quote, disrupt whiteness. Republican Congressman Byron Donalds telling us yesterday the group's agenda has no place in the classroom.
I do not stand for is this thought process that the country is irreparably racist and that white people are irreparably racist and there's nothing they can ever do except become anti-racist. It is not going to help our country become the more perfect union, which we frankly already are, if people would stop actually trying to demonize our past. Let's learn about our past.
That from yesterday. Now today, Star Parker, founder, president, Center for Urban Renewal and Education. How you doing, Star? Good morning to you. Nice to see you today. Here's the statement from the Department of Education. It's really the only reaction we've gotten so far. The department has not endorsed the recommendations of this group, nor do they reflect our policy positions. It was an error in a lengthy document to include this citation. An error. Okay. If that's the case, what now or what next?
Well, the crumbs are all over your face. Your hand is still in the jar, but you haven't been eating the cookies. Of course, they're going to deny that they are trying to transform our country into a Marxist utopia. I think it's time for conservatives to just admit that a collectivist, government-controlled and funded national education system will no longer work. It's time for money to follow children to schools that parents want, because we're split in half. I mean, our society is unraveling. That civil society is unraveling because our common culture has collapsed. We are no longer one unit. We have secular and we have sacred. The sacred believe in personal responsibility. The seculars believe in collectivism. So this is not a place for us to push all of our children into one environment and pretend that we are going to be able to teach them any type of values that are going to be consistent with each other.
Wow. Strong answer there. In case our viewers missed it yesterday, here is a portion of those who are members of the ATN on a Zoom call. Just watch here.
If you don't realize white supremacy is in everything we do, then we got a problem.
And trying to help other white teachers trouble their internalized white supremacy and anti-blackness.
Say loudly and clearly, reform is not enough.
We cannot reform when the brokenness is in the foundation. Education cannot save us. We must save education.
Well, it goes on. And so this is what they're about. This is all of this Marxist, tear it all down push. Now, there was also a report, I'll get back to this now. Whoops, that's AOC, sorry. I apologize for you having to see that twice. So here's a Fed Recruiter Poso tweeted this, breaking. Biden Pentagon to welcome discredited anti-Christian SPLC activists to advise counter-extremism working group. Now, I need to go back probably 6 years to 2015. There was a seminar that was run by the Department of it was run by a group, I can't remember the name of the organization, at Georgetown University. It was funded by private money. It was either Georgetown or George Washington. You can find the videos. And they had a working group of people that were going to work together to find extremists. It was the Department of Justice, and there was an assistant attorney general there who spoke. Don't remember his name either. And there was one of the, I think, lawyers or heads of the SPLC, which is the Southern Poverty Leadership Conference. And what that Obama administration was doing was taking information that came from the SPLC and using it to formulate policy to identify extremists. And you need to know, and I'm sure you know, that the SPLC identifies racist, supremacist groups like Pass the Salt Ministries, Dave Daubenmire out in Newark. Linda Harvey here, I can't remember the name of her organization, here in Columbus. The Family Research Council. And it had an impact. If you remember, they identify these hate groups at the Southern Poverty Law Center, which, using poverty in their name when they have hundreds of millions of dollars in reserve, is kind of a joke. They're well funded. They have a lot of money. And so what they were doing with the people in the Department of Justice was setting up policy to go after extremists, as identified by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Now look, the Southern Poverty Law Center identifies some supremacist groups and even some Islamic groups as extremists. But they go way beyond that and pull in anybody that they think is a religious conservative who might be opposed to certain principles. And remember, back in 2015, this is when there was a big decision coming out of the Supreme Court called Obergefell that effectively said same-sex marriage is a right. Now, you can look at the Constitution of the United States to see if there's anything in there about that. You will not find it. Again, this is one of those shadows and penumbra of the Constitution decisions that have really radicalized American law and got off into, well, so they just take the issue off. They say, well, it's a constitutional right. You can't legislate about it. Remember the big push, Proposition 8 in California? Talked to some of the people leading that. They worked really hard. They won big when it went up to a vote of the people of California to support same-sex marriage, or support traditional marriage. And then a judge in San Francisco overturned it. And I remember I was with one person the morning after that decision. It was distressing, to say the least. So now we had this happen in the second Obama administration. Now we're having this happen again in the third Obama administration, or the Biden administration, if you want to call it that. But if you're going to call it that, based on some of the things I saw happening from the figurative head of the Biden administration this week, you better do it quickly. Do you understand? I'm shocked. Now I'm going to start talking like him. I'm going to stutter and wander around and get off my notes. It was incoherent what I saw this week. I mean, I don't like seeing it. Because people in the world leaders see that. What do you think they think of that? And they wonder, like, well, who's in charge, or is anybody in charge? Well, I'm going to do whatever I want anyway. But here they are, Biden Pentagon, to welcome discredited anti-Christian SPLC activists to advise the counterterrorism working group. And so here are some of the, look at the advocacy groups that are involved in this, the NAACP. You see here, Ms. Alicia Brooks, Chief of Staff, Southern Poverty Law Center, Southern Poverty Law, General Counsel First Liberty Institute, ADL, Anti-Defamation League, the Brennan Center, Engage, FBI Agents Association, Leadership Conference, and then Memory, which Memory is a pretty good organization. So they are now coming out, and one of the things that they're doing is they have hooked up with a group called Moonshot CVE. I believe, and you see here, there's a joint report issued late last, I think it was on June 30th, by Moonshot and the Anti-Defamation League, White Supremacy Search Trends in the United States. As I researched this, Moonshot CVE is, I believe, a United Kingdom-based organization. And they put out these reports. Another report that they put out in March was called Redirect Method Canada. Now, what that report was talking about was that when people go to search engines and type in phrases, if they're, say, in what they define as white supremacist, extremist, that type of organization, includes a lot of people that aren't, when they're doing search engine searches, Google will direct them to the information that they're not looking for. And Google does this. If you remember when Dennis Prager and some other people testified in front of Congress back during the Trump administration, they said, the professor that was there, who was a left-wing professor, a liberal professor, and he said, what happened in 2016 changed hundreds and hundreds of thousands of votes because people were directed away from what they were searching for to find out more about Trump and what he might have stood for. They were directed to pro-Hillary Clinton sites. And so Google, and he said Google helped make the election a lot closer than it needed to be. Now, do you think they sort of magically stopped doing that, by the way? I mean, every now and then there'll be somebody I'm looking for, and you cannot find it like on Google. Now, you can go to DuckDuckGo or some of the other alternative search engines, and you can find it there. Bing there was something that people wanted to find on Bing, and it was gone. And of course, when Bing got called on, they said, oh, well, it was a mistake. It was a mistake that all the searches would not turn up that information. Oh, really? So it's just a mistake. So what they're doing, so this Canadian thing, and you need to understand, there's a lot of push in Canada to control the internet, control thought, hate speech, that sort of thing. So this is a report that Moonshot CVE, and the CVE, by the way, stands for Countering Violent Extremism. So they were advising how the search engines could redirect people away from what they call hate information or supremacist information, to, the stuff they should really be looking at. Because what do they want to do? They want to control the information that you're seeing. Now, the fact that this is occurring in our world is undeniable. I mean, look, every time there's a post on Facebook that might mention Charlie Victor 019er, you get that little pop-up thing. Even when you don't mention it, it comes up. Even if you're talking about measles vaccines, you'll get that little thing that'll pop up. It just is the way everything is going. So here is this Moonshot organization. So what I did was I went in, I thought, I'm going to research a little bit about Moonshot. That research almost immediately took me to the Obama Foundation. There is a very close tie and support between the Obama Foundation and Moonshot CVE. Now, I know you're just all, I thought Obama was just sitting in his basement watching basketball. Right? No, beyond buying $30 million homes on Martha's Vineyard and stuff, he's been busy. Now, this was one of my favorite photographs of the Obama administration. This was the morning after it was apparent that Trump was going to be the president. And this was, go to the one on the right. Yeah, there we go. A lot of unhappy people there. And frankly, I like that. I thought that was one of my favorite photographs of the Obama years. And you might recognize the person who is now the Ministry of Information, Minister of Truth, and heads up the White House press office, the truth and not misinformation part. And so if you go and you start digging around the Obama Foundation website, here it is. Meet the leaders. Obama leaders are emerging leaders who have demonstrated a commitment to what? Advancing the common good. Our leaders tackle a diversity of issues, but they have a lot in common. They have all driven positive change for their communities, are guided by core values, and share the Obama Foundation's vision of leadership rooted in service to others. So when you get on the website, and I gave you the URL there if you want to look at it, they have a section about Europe. Explore our work in Europe, Amsterdam and Berlin. Here is the back of the report on white supremacy. And here's inside the cover, they have this, about Moonshot Solutions. Moonshot Solutions is a London-based social enterprise dedicated to undermining the proliferation of harmful content online. We design and deploy new data-driven methodologies and technologies to enhance the capacity of our partners to effectively respond to a wide range of social issues in the online space. Our work ranges from software development, training, and capacity building to leading global counter messaging campaigns. Oh, so it sounds like controlling the narrative to me. Does it to you? The leader of this, identified as one of the leaders, the founder of Moonshot, is Vidya Ramalagam. So she's identified as one of these leaders that's associated with the Obama Foundation. So all of these people, when Trump took office, they didn't just slink away. A lot of them went to work. And you remember Obama had that, I don't know what, that social leader or emerging social leaders thing. I can't remember what he called. And for 4 years, my belief is they were planning what they would do if they ever got control of the White House again. I think they were highly successful. Now look, there's no way, believe me, there is no way that Joe Biden directed people to come up with all of these things to overturn all of Trump's executive orders. There's no way that Joe Biden did that. Valerie Jarrett? Yeah, probably. Oh, there she is. Susan Rice? I don't know if she's in that picture or not. She might have got it cut off. But anyway, they were all working on this for years. So that's why they hit the ground. They didn't hit the ground running. They hit the ground sprinting. So as my other research is, we had the Canadian thing that they did on search engines. And then I found this. The title of this is Anti-Vax Online. And it says, Analysis of Vaccine-Related Disinformation in Washington State. Published, guess when? Oh, this year, right? March 2019. In March of 2019, no one had ever heard of these things that we're not really supposed to talk about that are related to Charlie Vector 019er. This is a publication of Moonshot CVE. And if you read through this publication, they talk about other interests of the anti-vax audience. And Brian, if you can zoom in on the circle on the left, you will see that these are a bunch of people that especially in red, that have lost a lot of their social media platforms. Probably just a coincidence. Also on the right page, it talks about the response from the media companies. And so, for example, it says here, the data we have collected identifies a unique opportunity for social media companies to shape the consumption of anti-vax narratives online. Following the widespread criticism from lawmakers. Now listen, this is a publication from an associated group of the Obama Foundation. I'm only telling you what they say in their own words. Following the widespread criticism from lawmakers, journalists, and even their own customers, several of these businesses have expressed an intent to tackle vaccine disinformation in a positive, progressive way. So when you heard all of the videos that I played from you from our Minister of Truth and Information from the White House last week, and she talked about, focus on the right middle of that page, if you could, the social media groups, you see them all listed there, YouTube, Google, Twitter, I don't know if that one is TikTok. In any event, these are who they were aiming at to control the information flow. So now, so you saw the videos from our Minister of Truth and Information. So here's a trigger warning. I'm going to play a couple minutes of her at press conferences, press briefings this week. They ask her some more questions about following, like, what are you doing with these social media platforms? And here's what she said.
Follow up on misinformation on social media. I heard you say that all options are on the table, including maybe legal. Would that mean potential legal action against the 12 that have come of concern for misinformation?
All I was conveying is I'm not taking, I think the question was about legislative action, and I said that's up to Congress, and I'm not here to take options off of the table. That's Congress's purview to determine how they're going to move forward.
That's straight. And a follow-up, does that mean if it's up the purview of Congress that the administration or President Biden is seeing Section 230 a little differently, reforms to Section 230 that protect social media companies for third-party information?
You know, I think the president has been pretty clear in the past that he believes there's a responsibility of all platforms, including social media platforms, about the information that is traveling on their sites. But I don't have nothing new about his position on that issue. Go ahead.
Okay. So then there was another question, I think on Friday's press briefing, asking a question about, well, you know, you've had some people, had some positive COVID tests among the refugee lawmakers, Democratic lawmakers from Texas, had a number of those, and then people that were exposed to them have tested positive for COVID. I don't know that anybody's really all that sick or anything, but there was a question asked about, you know, breakthrough cases, and, well, just listen to this exchange.
I think first, we're in a very different place than we were 6 to 7 months ago as it relates to the virus. And as many medical experts have said, inside and outside of the government, those who are vaccinated are protected from serious illness. Most are asymptomatic if they are individuals who are vaccinated who get the virus. You know, we are in a different place in terms of the impact of individuals who may have, as you said, breakthrough cases.
Why not just provide the number? Are you trying to hide something?
No, but why do you need to have that information?
In case of transparency, the interest of the public, having a better understanding of how breakthrough cases work here in the White House.
Well, why do you need that information? Well, you know, this is called a press briefing. And press people gather facts and information and then write it up in their paper or social or their media platform. Do you kind of grasp where we are? So if you go back to this white supremacy thing, it contains a warning. So you can't even talk about the search trends when you're trying to control the flow of information without a warning. This report contains racist and violent extremist language and other content that users may find distressing. Protests in opposition to state lockdowns and other measures introduced in response to that thing-a-majiggy also provided opportunities for extremist movements to mobilize and engage with wider swaths of the public around shared grievances. While anti-lockdown protests were not related to white supremacy on the surface, these movements began to overlap in their joint opposition to the BLM movement. Election rigging were repeatedly co-opted and reinforced by white supremacist groups. So do you see what's happened here? This is they're making it up. I'll probably get a visit from the FBI, but so be it. I know people who were in Washington on January 6th. They didn't go anywhere near the Capitol. They've been interviewed by the FBI. They attended a rally. The rally did admittedly get out of hand, and there were things done that were just horrible and awful and shouldn't have happened. By the way, did anybody burn anything down that day? Just asking the question. So you understand now what they're doing is they're taking this and they're running it through their little filters, and now they've come up with this big narrative, and you're all at risk. So the truth, and so if you do a search on this topic, you are white supremacist, according to this report. The truth about Black Lives Matter. This search suggests that the BLM movement has nefarious motives and is a disinformation narrative perpetuated by white supremacist groups to weaponize anti-BLM sentiment. Believe me, in the background, the report, if you complain to your school board about CRT, you're one of them that the CV thing is looking at. Do you understand? We have gone so far down the road in this country. I'm concerned about it. Okay? Look, I know, I read the Bible. I know that persecution is coming. Persecution has been the sort of the general thing that's happened to the church in 2,000 years. I get that. But that doesn't mean I don't want to protect people from information that might not be correct. And we should be about the truth. I don't think this is about the truth. This is about building a narrative to go after people. And here are the top 10 sub-themes within anti-Black and anti-Semitic search traffic tracked in July and August of 2020. Anti-BLM, Jewish world domination conspiracies. And look, some of these are things that, I think the people that follow this are, crazy conspiracy theorists. As I said, I only believe the conspiracy theories that are true. I'm very, very focused on that. General anti-Semitism, Holocaust denial, pro-slavery. I don't know anybody in this country that I have ever met that is pro-slavery. Do you? You may answer yes or no, I don't know anybody. Do you know anybody? No. Criminalization of Black Americans. More about that one. Anti-Black incitement to violence. General anti-Black, and then Anne Frank. That's one that'll really identify you as an extremist. Now back to this criminalization of Black Americans. There is a new report. It is an official website of the United States Government Department of Justice. And you can watch evidence-based theory and research on community violence intervention. See, it's an official website of the United States government. And it says this: in April 2021, the Biden-Harris administration, aka the Biden administration, or Obama's third term, announced historic investments in community violence intervention efforts to combat the gun violence epidemic. As part of the administration's efforts to support communities seeking to implement or expand CVI efforts, subject matter experts will present CVI-related topics in a series of webinars. This is a joint effort of the United States Department of Justice, the United States Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Housing and Urban Development, Department of Labor, U.S. Department of Education, and the White House Domestic Policy Council. In other words, just about everybody in the administration is contributing to this. Here's one of the slides from one of the community violence intervention, leveraging social and structural factors to understand and prevent community violence. This guy from Vanderbilt University. Now, Carol Swain, who's a good solid conservative, they tried to get rid of her at Vanderbilt because she was conservative. But if you see here, now here is this guy's theory as to how community violence, gun crime, propagates itself in inner city neighborhoods that are in many cases largely black. Look, go look at what Chicago's, look at what Columbus. What do we have, 150 murders so far this year in Columbus, Ohio? What is the mayor doing? He's hiring woke people to run the police department. But you see here, you have structural disadvantage and structural marginalization, individual and collective trauma and victimization, interpersonal violence. But what's pushing that on the left? White supremacy ideology. So people who they put in that category, they are responsible for the gun violence in Chicago that we see every weekend where there's over 100 people shot. Do you see the narrative that they're putting together to come after people? There's an article, and just give you sort of an example of how this works with people on the left. This is an article from a Finnish blog today. Don't worry, I have a translation. The battlefield of the cultural war. Pavi Rasanen was charged with gay speeches. Soon a large number of European conservatives and U.S. trumpeters came to his aid. And the reason that translates in Finnish is that word could be he or his, and Google Translate just doesn't get it quite right. So it's her aid. In the legal battle, Rasanen's defense is strengthened by an international network of Christian lawyers. And here's the picture that accompanies this. You see to her right, your left, Tony Perkins from Family Research Council. You go down there a little bit further, you see Billy Graham. And then you see the people with, they've got the gavel for law thing. Then there's a peace dove that must represent the people on the left, obviously. And then you have the Bible, and you have the megaphones that are shouting things. So this is what Pavi or Pavy, or however you say her name. He said this: the article mentions Trump a dozen times in the story, who has nothing to do with my case. This came up long before Trump was even running for office. Instead of defending freedom of speech, this blog focuses on stamping those who take care of limitations on freedom of speech and religion with the Trump card. Stamps are often struck when they don't want to or can't handle it themselves. Another blog that I wrote, it was about Niles Ferguson, Nialls. I think he's with the Hoover Institution now. Well, he's an atheist. And he wrote on a blog called Thinking Theology. Great article, if you can find it, where he talks about, atheists are coming to the realization that the religion of the left offers nothing. It doesn't even offer redemption. You can never overcome being a racist if they deem you a racist. And the whole cancel culture thing that goes about it. So there was another article that I read about, talking about the article. By the way, Ferguson is married, I believe his wife for the last 10 years has been Ayaan Hirsi Ali, from the Somalian former legislator in the Netherlands, who had to flee the Netherlands because people around her were getting killed. But Douglas Murray, it talks about Murray, who was raised as a Catholic, I think, but left the faith, and I believe he says he's a gay man. But Doug Murray wrote a great book called The Madness of Crowds. Murray believes that Christianity is essential because secularists have been thus far totally incapable of creating an ethic of equality that matches the concept that all human beings are created in the image of God. In a column in The Spectator, he noticed that post-Christian society has three options. The first is to abandon the idea that all human life is precious. Another is to work furiously to nail down an atheist version of the sanctity of the individual. And if that doesn't work, then there's only one other place to go, which is back to faith, whether we like it or not. He said this: the sanctity of human life is a Judeo-Christian notion which might very easily not survive the disappearance of Judeo-Christian civilization. In the Vancouver Sun, Douglas Scott has a post about the church burnings in Canada. I think this is all related. Remember the tweet of the now former head of the BC Civil Liberties Organization in response to the posting of an article about the burning of the churches in Canada, now over 25? What did she say? Burn it all down. She's a leftist, and she supported that sentiment, although she now appears to be attempting to deny that what she actually wrote meant what it actually said. Douglas Todd, the author of this, says there have been assaults on Muslims, some deadly. There have been arson attack after arson attack on churches. Vandalism against sacred symbols is becoming the norm. Social media, this is Vancouver, British Columbia, maybe the most beautiful city on the planet. Social media pours forth hate speech toward people of faith. Twitter doesn't seem to care. And this rising vitriol is not a result of animosity between Muslims or Christians. Something stranger is going on. The new Canadian brand of Christophobia seems most linked to those who trumpet decolonization. The term originally meant the process of a state withdrawing from a former colony. But with almost no one leaving Canada, it is now a fraught vision for the removal or undoing of colonial elements from throughout the land. What that exactly means is hard to figure. But we are seeing signs of this once academic term is being understood by a dangerous fringe who would presumably condemn an Islamophobic attack but adopt a double standard on Christophobic arsons. Ray Pennings of Cardis, a Canadian think tank, said this: I fear church burnings could be an indication that Canadians are losing the ability to discuss faith publicly using the vocabulary of civility and respect. He notes that most of these churches, a lot of these churches that are being bound, the indigenous community is largely Christian, different sects of Christianity. And so I'm not saying they're true evangelical, but in the broad sense of that term, they're Christian, and their churches are being burned, and they don't like it. But that doesn't matter to the left. Canada is becoming increasingly filled with division and distrust. It's hard to think it's going to get better. Well, Mr. Scott, eventually it will. Jesus is going to come back and clean this mess up. But so do you see the narrative that's developed around all of this? I think this is a very important thing, and I think this fits within Bible prophecy, the narrative. This wokeness, critical race theory. It's not so much don't study critical race theory, understand what they're saying, but it's the policy implementation that comes from that that's tearing society apart. And the Ministry of Information and Truth doesn't care about that at all. We'll tell you what to believe. Remember what the New Zealand Prime Minister said? If you want information, you come to us, don't trust anybody else. Now, they haven't said that at the United States Ministry of Information and Truth, but you know it's coming. And so now do you see how this whole big picture fits together? And there's sort of a pivot point, I think, around a lot of it. So when Jen Psaki, excuse me, I forgot she changed her name, or we changed her name. When she talks about misinformation, you know what she's doing. Because if you read that Moonshot CVE publication, it looks like a playbook that somebody's been planning if they ever get the chance to implement. Okay, so let's look, and that took way, way longer than I thought it was going to take. So big surprise there. I mentioned this in my midweek update, that The Guardian has had a series of articles Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday this week. Some of it's available online. I have a subscription access that I can get a lot of these newspapers. And there was an Israeli company called NSO. NSO devised for lack of a better term, hacking software. The Israeli government determined who would get access to that software, and there were pretty strict rules about using it. Now, the contention of the Guardian article is that this spyware, this hacking software, it really gets into your phone and gives them information to everything. I use the example, by the way, it's leading to a lot of anti-Semitic comments because it comes from an Israeli company. If you don't think that there are other countries and companies that are doing this around the world, you are sorely misinformed. It's not just an Israeli operation. This is the one for some reason that they focused on. And they were given access. Now, the people with NSO in Israel, one of the founders of the company left a few years ago because he said, I don't want to get beheaded because of the way somebody might use this information and somebody get upset and he gets arrested and taken to a certain country where something like that could happen. So there were about 50,000 phone numbers that include journalists, people that included Khashoggi. And let's just dispel this notion that Adnan Khashoggi, the man who was murdered in the Saudi embassy in Istanbul, was some kind of saint. He was a big Al-Qaeda supporter. So let's get over this, the sainting of this guy. He was a lousy human being. But the Washington Post, boy, they love him because they talk about him all the time. And so here's some of the statistics. Let's use it even was in India. People are upset. Modi in India, his rival was a potential target. Macron was on the leaked data list. Now, we don't know if the list is actually accurate, but they did have a list of phone numbers that they traced. I used the example in my midweek update of a Catholic archbishop, I think the head of the Catholic Archbishop Organization in America or maybe worldwide, who resigned this week because somebody had gotten his phone information and did geolocating on it. They were able to analyze which was his phone and traced him to gay bars and pickup places and hookup places. And so he resigned. So we don't support that, right? What he did. But the point of it is using publicly available information from other companies, they were able to track everywhere this guy went, even down to the point that He had an archbishop's organization meeting, and then he went to a gay bar within an hour. They knew that. This is happening everywhere to all of us. So people wanted it investigated. They're trying to blame Netanyahu. They're saying it's right-wingers, and so this is the narrative again. There was a UAE link. Remember the princess who's the half-sister of King Abdullah II of Jordan, who was married to the sheikh who's the head of the United Arab Emirates. She was his fifth or sixth wife at the same time. As I said in my update, it's always that sixth or seventh wife. You can manage the first five, but when you add that sixth or seventh one into the mix, it just really gets a little bit messy. And so she fled to England with the kids, and then it was also revealed he used, they believe, this spyware to locate his daughter who had fled just recently, just in the last month or so. And she was picked up off the coast of India by a squad of Indian commandos and returned to the United Arab Emirates. So he's the sheikh that runs Dubai. But he's sort of the big, like 7 sheikdoms that join together to form the United Arab Emirates. Abu Dhabi's another one, Dubai. So he's the one that's head of Dubai, which is tremendous development over the last 40 years. Just incredible building and just amazing. So Amazon took down some of the Pegasus ability. It's probably more complex than I know. Here's an article: the firm whose spyware can spy on the world. Global revelations, global shock. This is the head of the NSO. Here's an article in Israel Hayom on Friday talking about that. Here's even in the Times UK this morning. Naftali Bennett came out and said, look, we have to use this stuff. Do you understand people are after us? So, as this article in the Times says, Times of London, all the bad guys love the newsie. Now Israeli cyber spies are the autocrat's weapon of choice. So this is kind of a big deal. Let me switch over to South Africa for just a moment. Here's just a graphic. I couldn't find a better quality one, but it gets you the point. Counting the cost. So on July 19th, they put up this graphic of what had been damaged in these protests, riots, organized looting things that happened in South Africa. And look at this, 161 malls were attacked. Damage of 20 billion. That's the impact. 150,000 jobs at risk. Burnt or significant fire damage, 100 malls across South Africa. This was a put-up job. There's a government dispute. Won't go into all the details. But Zuma, who was put out of office, and then there was a tremendous amount of corruption. So, for example, what they would do is somebody would sell something to the government. So they would charge them, I'll use American dollars because I understand American dollars. The services are $3 million in goods and services. $3 million. Well, really the value was like $1 million. Well, what happened to the excess? Well, the people that are selling it, they already got their profit, right? So the $2 million went to these government thieves that were looting the country. So Zuma was told to, I think, supply information about that. He refused. He was put into jail on contempt, and then all hell broke loose. So South Africa it appears that they've kind of weathered the storm, but I've seen videos of this. People in South Africa that watch these updates, they've sent me videos, and I should probably use them sometime. I mean, they just went into malls and took everything and then burned it. They went into businesses of people and took everything and burned it. This was an action to tear down the society to get other people back in power. Okay. Let's see here. Well, I've been talking a little bit about the slow death of Lebanon. Go watch my update. Lebanon is going through one of the gravest economic depressions in modern history. And while things seem to have calmed down, the nation of Lebanon is on the verge of collapse. We also have this report that was in Israel Hayom about Zarif, who put out this paper information to people saying, hey, these are all the concessions that the United States government is going to make to us. Now, one way of looking at that is, this is the way the Iranians negotiate. They put out things that say, this is what you've said. When you've not said them, then you spend all your time trying to refute what they've said you said. And in the meantime, the Iranians walk away with like, well, that's what I heard. I mean, this is what we want anyway. And we thought we were near an agreement. Or it could be that the Biden administration is really that stupid that they are making these type of concessions. And given the way they act and what they've been doing on the JCPOA renegotiations or negotiations to reinstate that, and what they're giving up on, they're removing sanctions from all these organizations in Iran. Even I hear the Ayatollah Khamenei will be removed from the sanctions list, as will the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. And then the question becomes, and then the Iranian Atomic Energy Organization. And that's whether they agree to the new JCPOA or reinstating the JCPOA or not. Who's running the show? It seems like there's somebody that really wants this JCPOA to come back because this person thinks this was the great achievement of the second Obama administration. That's just my speculation. I could be only 98% right on that. I'll acknowledge that, I'm not perfect. Let's see. So Iran is using the turmoil in Syria and Lebanon to further its going, and what's happening here, this is being reported at a bunch of places, severe water shortages add a volatile element to the challenges in Iran. There have been massive protests that are taking place. I think I have something on this here someplace. Oh, well, before I get to that, here's a tweet with a video of some of the protests that are going on in Iran. 17 cities across the country. Even the Ayatollah has come out and said, well, there's water problems. We're going to release water from the dams. It just seems that the Iranians are very finicky about having water. And they don't like it when they don't have it. Here is the slide on the left is, here, let me do this. The Lebanon water system, this is water problems there. Jordan has them, Lebanon's having them, and they're more severe, it appears, than they have been in the past. Here's from the Times of London yesterday. Iran runs out of water as drought grips the Middle East. At least 8 people have died in recent protests, which started in Khuzestan, the southern province, which has suffered some of the worst effects, according to Amnesty International. The water shortage is being replicated across the region, with marshes of southern Iraq starting to dry out again despite restoration efforts, and eastern Syria suffering a drought. Now, this drought in Syria, this is what, they had like a 3-year drought back in 2008 to 2011. That led to higher food prices, riots that led to the Syrian civil war. The Iraqi drought in the southern part of the Euphrates River is there's a drought. That's one reason, but the other reason is Turkey has dammed up the Euphrates River, and they control the flow of the Euphrates River, so that there's a physical way today that the Euphrates could be dried up, which is prophesied in the book of Revelation. It exists. I've talked a lot about this network of dams that Erdogan has set up. This is from the Arab News this morning. You know, the water shortages are like pouring gasoline on the fire of the Iranian protest. Now I'm going to do one more thing. I will, because I think this is kind of important, and I'll keep it relatively short. Here is by the way, this is not the thing I was going to do. This is the bonus thing. ICBM silos under construction in China, 120 missile silos. China says it's a wind farm. Okay, show us the windmill, Mr. Z. Now, there was a thing in Jerusalem called the 7th Global Forum for Combating Anti-Semitism. Yair Lapid, who is I don't know what they call it, he's the foreign minister and the substitute prime minister. But he's got the largest party, so I think he's really calling the shots. And if you want a good analysis of what's going on, go listen to Caroline Glick and her cohort. They do a weekly podcast. Caroline did it this week from her parents' home, her mother's home in Chicago. In fact, her mother kind of walked in on him like, I'm on international internet. So if you want to see what Caroline Glick's mother looks like, you can do that. But great analysis she does each week. She took a week off for travel, I think. But she's done a great analysis on what's going on, particularly in Israel. So what happened was, at this forum, Lapid, because he'd been exposed to people with COVID, he had to isolate, so he appeared at the conference in Jerusalem by Zoom. And he made what I think people, Caroline and others, were pretty upset about how he talked about anti-Semitism. And here's from this article in the Jerusalem Post. Foreign Minister Lapid said on Wednesday that anti-Semitism was a part of a broad family of hatreds, and that anti-Semites start by attacking Jews, but always move on to focus their hate and violence on other groups as well. During his address, the foreign minister related a story about his father, who told him about his experiences during the Holocaust, and asked him how it was possible that a person became so full of hate, prejudice, and venom that they wanted to kill a young 13-year-old boy. He asserted that anti-Semitism was akin to other hatreds, and such as ones held by those who participated in the slave trade, the Hutu massacres of the Tutsis in Rwanda, and Islamist extremists. Anti-Semitism isn't the first name of hate, it's the family name, the foreign minister said. Lapid said that modern anti-Semitism exists everywhere, and that the Jewish people need allies, and to enlist people who believes it is wrong to persecute people just because of their faith, sexuality, gender, nationality, or the color of their skin. And before this, he had gone to the European Union, and he made some remarks that one would only describe as fuzzy. Gowdy, the guy who does the things with Caroline, he said, I think that Lapid is a postmodern. He wants to feel good about what he says. And so he's willing to make what really ultimately become pretty enormous concessions. Now, the left in Israel, this is from Haaretz, near Gantaras, said Lapid's speech was nothing less than world-changing. It was a foundational event in the history of Israel, and maybe even the history of the Jewish people. It is unlikely that Lapid thought about the significance of his speech before he gave it. Is it very similar to what Caroline and her co-host said on their show. In my opinion, he simply woke up in the morning with an idea, went to Wikipedia to find examples of hatred and integrated them into his abstract idea he woke up with. Lapid tried to explain to the world what anti-Semitism is and said the time is to come is to tell the true story of anti-Semitism. This article in the Jerusalem Post, the real threats of modern anti-Semitism, deals with this issue. And it's like, did you notice how Rashida Tlaib and AOC and Ilhan Omar, they make these statements and they never get called on it when they're clearly anti-Semitic in their nature. And if they do, I mean, you've seen the videos here of how how Ilhan Omar will respond to things. So here's just a quote from this article, The Real Threat of Anti-Semitism. Students on campus are indoctrinated that being white, heterosexual, cisgender, middle class, and able-bodied are all associated with privilege, oppression, and domination. Only belonging to an opposing category grants you marginalized identity, in which case you are definitionally and proudly oppressed. The bitter irony, of course, she points out, is that in the critical social justice paradigm, Jews, who have never been seen as white by those for whom being white is a moral good, are now seen as white by those for whom whiteness is an unmitigated evil. This reflects the nature of anti-Semitism. No matter the grievance or the identity of the aggrieved, Jews are held responsible. Critical race theory does not merely make it easy to demonize Jews using the language of social justice, it makes it difficult not to. And then he goes on, he talks about the Palestinian conflict. Caroline herself, in her Friday article on Israel Hayom, says, title of the article is, In America, Corbyn Won. And she talks about the fact that they had a protest in Washington, D.C., where pro-Israel groups were going to get together to march in support of Israel. And they worked on getting people there, and they got 3,000, which is nothing for a Washington, D.C. rally, protest, march, whatever. And Caroline says this is very troubling. And so what has happened, and I'll talk more about this in the future, was there was a survey that was done of American Jewry. And it talked about, do you believe that Israel is an apartheid state? Do you believe that Israel has committed genocide of the Palestinians? And among American Jews, it's like 25% of the people agree it's an apartheid state or committed a genocide of the Palestinians. Now listen, back in the 1948-49 war, a lot of Palestinians left. They left the country because their leadership told them, if you leave, we'll bring you back when everything is okay. And they're still in refugee camps in Jordan. They're still in refugee camps in Syria and Lebanon. And they're used as political pawns. So if you ever read some of these activists like, well, there are refugee camps in Israel. Okay, let's talk about the ones in Jordan. Why are they still there? That's in an Arab country. They're not even allowed to vote there. So Caroline notes the survey, and she says the results of the survey are just troubling. The responses to the questions were hard to stomach. The Israeli public reeled at the news that a quarter of American Jews think that Israel is an apartheid state, and 24% say it isn't anti-Semitic to say Israel is an apartheid state. 22% believe Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians. And 31% say it isn't anti-Semitic to say that Israel is committing genocide. By the way, the point of my bringing up the thing about the refugees, so a lot of Palestinians, Arabs, and we'll call them Palestinians, even though that's a term that was made up in the 60s, but they left. People call them Palestinians today. And so there were a lot left in Israel, though, in the area of Judea and Samaria. By the way, that's becoming the more accepted term than West Bank. I'm eternally grateful for that. But in that area, the occupied area of Israel, the population of Palestinians has gone up by 4 times. So my question is, if the Palestinian population has increased by a factor of 4, after a lot of them left and haven't come back, is Israel very good at genocide? It doesn't sound like they're doing a very good job in achieving that, which they shouldn't, and they don't. That's the point. So Caroline's very troubled by this. Thanks to the progressive Jews who ordered the poll, tomorrow Congress people, Ilhan Omar and her fellow Jew haters inside and outside the Democrat Congressional Caucus will use the poll results to deflect criticism as they spew anti-Semitic blood libels against Israel and its Benjamin-wielding American Jewish supporters. This brings us to the moderates, who comprise the majority of the American Jewish establishment. Like their counterparts in the Democratic leadership, these leaders know full well that Israel is not an apartheid state or committing genocide or guilty of systemic racism, and they know it is anti-Semitic to raise obscene allegations. But like House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Majority Leader Charles Schumer, they won't fight progressives to defend the truth. They will remove Israeli flags from their synagogues, schools, Jewish community centers, and stages at rallies. They won't talk about Israel, and they will endorse statements of inclusion that insist you cannot fight anti-Semitism without fighting all forms of hatred, because there isn't anything unique about Jew hatred. In any way, the occupation is divisive and stuff like that. They will repeat these incantations without realizing that they have adopted Jeremy Corbyn's lexicon. Corbyn, after all, defended himself from allegations of anti-Semitism by saying he couldn't possibly be an anti-Semite because he was anti-racist. The situation is even more complicated by the fact that many of the intersectionality crowd's preferred victim groups, including the ones included in the No Fear rally, they had these signs saying no hate, no fear. And they put out for this rally, one of the things that they did to get the rally organized was they put out a statement of inclusion, which kind of undermined the whole purpose of it. The credo of the American Jewish establishment requires Jews to side with groups that are victimizing and deliberately targeting them. Anti-Semitism in Britain didn't disappear with Corbyn's defeat. It has continued to rise just as it has in the U.S. All the same, the difference between the two communities is clear. When push came to shove, the American Jewish establishment stood up for the Jews, even at the price of turning its back on progressive intersectional slogans. Through its show of weakness on July 11th, as in its activities both before and since, the American Jewish establishment has demonstrated to friend and foe alike that in the U.S. the situation is reversed. While the progressive faction of the Jewish establishment promotes and abets anti-Semitism, the moderate majority has opted to give up the fight for Jewish rights without a struggle. I hope you can see all of these different lines of Bible prophecy and anything, the rising anti-Semitism, the isolation of Israel, the narratives that are being built about Christians and others in the United States, that if you're not on board with all of these ideas that we put forth, you're not just opposed, you're not the opposition, you're an extremist. And it's okay to come after extremists because they're, extremists. And we have to deal with those. The other interesting thing in Israeli politics right now is, this was a headline in the Jerusalem Post the other day, Prime Minister's office, this is what Naftali Bennett, or at the direction of Yair Lapid, whoever's running that show there, said Netanyahu's failings left Iran closer to the nuclear bomb. So what did we hear while Netanyahu was in office? And it's even come up in the press recently. Netanyahu was trying to get Trump to bomb Iran. Netanyahu is on the verge of nuking Iran. Netanyahu is getting ready to invade Iran. And now that the election's over, the Prime Minister's office of Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid, the two-headed thing that's running that, says, hey, we're in trouble now because Netanyahu didn't do anything. Well, I thought for years you've been saying he was on the verge of war. Now he didn't do anything. This is intellectually incoherent, and it is the intellectual space that the progressives in the world occupy at all times. What they say doesn't make any sense when you analyze it. And now one more story. Ben & Jerry's have decided to end the sale of ice cream in the occupied territories in Judea and Samaria. So I spent a while yesterday with Photoshop. I made up my own Ben & Jerry's ice cream carton, fully baked anti-Semites. And here we see, well, I think I have a bigger version of it, Brian. Here we go. And you know where it says Vermont's finest, Vermont's wokest? Dollops of anti-Semitism mixed with gobs of self-righteous leftism. And where the fair trade thing used to be, I put the BDS stamp. So I think that's pretty good. So take a screenshot, share it. You can use my name if you want or not. But this is Unilever's stock, who owns the company, has gone way down. Amen. Hallelujah. And you can live without Ben & Jerry's. Some of their flavors are kind of goofy. I'll finish with this. Let's take 3 minutes. Look, this is all related to the anti-Semitism thing. So I'm not changing subjects here. I heard that out there. So this is what the International Holocaust Remembrance Association has worked for years and years and years to get this definition of anti-Semitism adopted around the world. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, towards Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. Anti-Semitism is growing. Get Olivier Melnick's book on anti-Semitism. Boy, we got to get him back here. It's been probably 2 years. So he's been here a few times. You can find the videos on our YouTube channel. So here's a little interview on ILTV with Jorm Ettinger, who's done great work, particularly on the demographics. I think his demographic analysis is superior to almost anybody else out there. That, you know, this notion that they can't have a one-state solution because the Palestinians will overwhelm the Jewish population, I just don't think is true. And he has good reason for that. You can read that on his blog. But he was interviewed about, what do you think about what Lapid did and how he kind of got fuzzy on this issue of anti-Semitism? Here's the interview.
Speaking of international ties, Israel's Foreign Minister Yair Lapid continuing his meetings with world leaders in Brussels, Belgium. And while addressing the EU Foreign Affairs Council for the first time in over a decade, Lapid officially declaring his support for a two-state solution. But Lapid is also claiming that a peace agreement will only work on the condition that a future Palestinian state be both democratic and peaceful with Israel. So, what does this mean? Here to analyze is expert on the Middle East and U.S.-Israel ties, retired Israeli Ambassador Jorm Ettinger. Ambassador Ettinger, thank you so much for being with us. Is this a departure from Israel's previous policy?
Well, it's not a departure from Israeli policy, but it's a repeat of self-destruct policies. We first encountered it in 1993, and the same erroneous assumptions which have nothing to do with the Middle East were made, which led to the Oslo Accord, assuming that dramatic historical gesture to the Palestinians, at that time Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas, would moderate the Palestinians. The reaction by the Palestinians, as by the way should have been expected, was more intense terrorism against Israel. And it seems to me that the most effective and objective way to assess the merit of Israel Foreign Minister's recent statement about the advisability of a Palestinian state is to examine such statement against the backdrop of the Palestinians of the PLO. There is a reality in the Middle East where Arabs do not flex muscles other than their talk on behalf of the PLO. And the reason they don't flex their military or financial or political muscle on behalf of the Hamas Palestinians, PLO Palestinians, or any Palestinians is the fact that as far as Arabs are concerned, the Palestinians have been role model of intra-Arab terrorism, intra-Arab subversion, and intra-Arab ingratitude. And moreover, you can assess the impact of a proposed Palestinian state on the state of the Middle East, as well as American interest, by describing or by identifying the allies of the Palestinians in the past and in the present. We're talking about Iran, North Korea, we're talking about Cuba, Venezuela. In the past, we're talking about the Soviet bloc, before the Soviet bloc, Nazi Germany. A Palestinian state in the West Bank would doom the pro-Western, pro-Hashemite, pro-US Hashemite regime in Jordan, would create a negative ripple effect from Jordan southward into the Arabian Peninsula, dealing a major blow to every single pro-American Arab regime, destabilizing the Middle East, and certainly a Palestinian state would be a very accommodating foothold for the Ayatollahs of Iran, for Russia, for China, certainly not for any Western or US military force in the Middle East.
So it sounds like...
Well, that was pretty clear. And Abbas issued a 14 demands for restating. I'll talk more, maybe that's a midweek update. And then just this. 4 Iranians were charged with plotting to kidnap and author an American citizen who is anti-Iranian, raises questions about the attacks of the regime. She's a journalist, author. They tried to kidnap her in America, in Brooklyn, New York City, USA. At a press conference, the Minister of Information and Truth was asked about it and said, well, that's a Department of Justice issue. While they're negotiating with these people, I pray that somebody in the White House press corps presses her on this issue, because I love playing those type of clips. Remember that thing in The Untouchables where I like it when the guy does this with his tie when we're getting close to nailing him for murder. And she said she's confronted people and she's getting no response from them. Well, a lot more that we could talk about. We'll save some of this stuff for maybe a midweek, kind of midweek update sometime. But do you see how this is all sort of converging together? Also ask for your prayer. I've been asked to speak at Liberty University School of Law Chapel this fall. So if you have suggestions on what I should talk about, send them to me and I'll reject them. I think I know what I'm going to talk about, but maybe somebody has a better idea than I do. No, seriously, I'll look at all of them. And you can get the address on the church website. So, wow, what a week. What a half week. What a 2 days, Let's pray. Father, we pray, Lord, that you will keep us centered in your word. I think of the admonitions in Psalm 1 that we are to be a man who stays in the word is like a tree planted by the water. That it nourishes us and it keeps us strong and faithful and true. We pray that you will help us to be committed people of truth, and also people committed to taking the time we have in this increasingly difficult world to share the gospel with people. Pray that you'll bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.